Bright Cutie. Every student matters.
Hello students. Now let's talk about the formation of the Muslim League. Now students, before this we have been talking about the early revolutionary movement, right? Now if I ask you, can you name some of the important revolutionaries? You can do that, correct? So, some of the important revolutionaries were like Madan Lal Dhingra, Lala Hardayal, right? Apart from that, Ashfaqullah Khan. I know a lot of names, but you also remember a lot of names, right? Ras Bihari Bose and so on. Bhagat Singh, about which we are going to learn later on as well. But here students, now let us talk about a different thing that was happening all together in our country. We all remember the partition of Bengal, right? And the main idea of the partition of Bengal, according to whom? According to the historians as well as the real motive of Lord Curzon. What did we see there? We saw that it was based on the policy of divide and rule, correct? Now, why am I talking about the partition of Bengal? Because I want to connect to this idea of divide and rule here. We have seen how the British officials, they played on the lines of communalism, right? Making Hindus and Muslims fight against each other, because they thought that till they are against each other, they are no more a threat to the British government. But if they are united, they might pose a threat to the British government. Therefore, they very much emphasized on the policy of divide and rule. So that is what happened in our country, that through this doctrine, through this policy of divide and rule, there was the formation of the Muslim League in our country, right? Because they now demanded some other things that was different, right, to the demands of the Hindus. It was only after the divide and policy rule that was being adopted by the British government, and it was being followed time and again, okay? Let us try to understand all these points here in this topic, right? So, now British had followed a deliberate policy of divide and rule after the revolt of 1857. Now, do you remember the revolt of 1857? You might have read in class 8, right? So, we have learnt about the Sepoy Mutiny, as we call it as well. We call it, the revolt of 1857 is known as the Sepoy Mutiny, right? So, the Sepoys, the Sipahis in Hindi when we call it that, they were targeting the British government, right? And the whole mutiny, it took place in the year 1857. So, it was only after the revolt of 1857 that the British government, they started realizing the threat that Indians can pose to them. And there were certain actions, certain decisions that were made after the revolt of 1857. So we see that in the army, there were various people, various communities, including the Muslims, who were not included in the British army. Only people who were included were those who were on the side of the British government throughout this revolt of 1857. So the whole army was reorganized and certain actions were taken place in order to stop these revolts to take place in future. Right, students? So, there was this whole idea of divide and rule that they started following in our country. So, in the beginning, Muslims were discriminated in various ways. Like I told you that in British Army as well, we see that they were not included because they thought that they are going to pose a serious threat, right, to the British government. With the growth of nationalism and Congress, we all know that in the year 1885, Indian National Congress was formed, and now this was a serious threat to the British government somehow. Why? Because in all these sessions, we see that deliberations were taking place, petitions were being filed, and they were being written, and they were being circulated, right? So a kind of awareness was also spreading all around. And with the coming up of moderates, extremists, revolutionaries later on, we see that Now the British government found it hard to control such large sections. So therefore, they saw this as a good opportunity to change their policy. Now Congress was seen as a Hindu movement, and here the upper class Muslims, they were being encouraged to start their own separate organizations. Now what is happening in our country? After Indian National Congress has been formed, we see that the British government, they tried to persuade the upper class Muslims because they thought that somehow the Hindus and the Congress, they are going to pose a threat to them. So therefore, the best idea is to follow the policy of divide and rule. Keep the Hindus and Muslims divided in this line on the basis of religion, right? So upper class Muslims, now they were being encouraged to form their own separate organizations, to form their own demands. And they were assured that British government is going to look on to their demands. Okay, so they were assured with this whole theory. Now let us see what happened later on. In 1883, Muslims, they demanded a separate representation in local bodies. So finally, what are we seeing? We see that with all these policies that were being followed, finally in the year 1883, somehow the Muslims, they started demanding for separate representation in local bodies. Why? Because we see that the British government, they had put this idea in the mind of Muslims that whenever the elections are going to take place, the Hindus, they are in majority and they are going to win the elections, right? So therefore, Muslims, they now started demanding for separate representation in the local bodies. Now you also remember that they were supporting the partition of Bengal, right? Somehow the British government, they tried to impose this idea that they were doing for the betterment of Bengal, right? So Eastern Bengal and the west part of Bengal. Eastern Bengal was a hub of Muslims there. Majority of them, they were Muslims, and they were ensured that it was for better administration. Correct, students? So this is how, based on the communal lines, they were trying to create a rift between the Hindus and the Muslims, right? Now, Sir Syed Khan here, he discouraged the Muslims from joining the Congress. In the year 1885, as we know that the Indian National Congress was formed, but the main idea was to discourage the Muslims from joining the Indian National Congress. Now, do you think, what do you think, why they were refraining the Muslims from joining the Congress? Obviously, because they knew that it was a Hindu organization. Why? Majority of them, they were Hindus. And in their minds, the British government was trying to impose the idea that since this is a Hindu organization, your ideologies would not be considered here, right? So you should try to form a separate organization. Now, in 1906, in the Calcutta session, do you remember the Calcutta session? Like I told you, it was presided by whom? Dadabhai Naoroji, right? So, you must be aware of the name Muhammad Ali Jinnah, M.A. Jinnah. Now, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, very important leader and also considered as the founder of Pakistan, right? One of them, among the founders of Pakistan, he moved a motion against the reservation of seats. Now here, in the beginning, what do we see? Muhammad Ali Jinnah, right, who later on was demanding for a separate state of Pakistan. Initially, he was very much against the idea of the reservation of seats. For whom? For the Muslims. Why? Because he believed that the Indian National Congress, it believed in equality of all. And he was very much in favor of Hindu-Muslim unity. So here we see that there were some Muslims who were driven with the ideas that were being imposed to them by the British government. But there were few people who still tried to get together, right? Believing in this whole Hindu-Muslim unity. Okay? And the best example here is that of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. But afterwards we see that after the partition of Bengal, when we are talking about that period, we see that communal sentiments, it increased again with the policy of divide and rule through certain acts or through certain decisions that were being made by the British government. So concessions given to them by the British government would be withdrawn and interest of the upper and middle Muslim classes would suffer. So we see that certain acts were taking place, concessions that were not good for Muslims, and also this was a way through which the Muslims, they were now thinking about their own community, right? About the well-being of their own community. And this was the time that they decided that they should form a separate organization altogether and challenge the Hindu organization as per them when we are talking about the Indian National Congress. So it was on 1st October 1906 that a delegation led by His Highness, here I have missed the name here is Aga Khan, very famous and very important Muslim leader at that time, right? So Aga Khan, he met Viceroy Minto at Shimla and he was accompanied by the Nawab of Dhaka, right, in Bangladesh. So today's Bangladesh, right? So his name was Nawab Salim Ullah. Okay, students? So accompanied by him, they both went to meet Lord Minto. Now Lord Minto suggested them to form a separate organization, right? It was the only idea of the British government in order to break this unity. So therefore finally what happened? It was on 30th December 1906 that Muslim League was formed. Okay. Now when we are talking about the Muslim League, who were the important leaders or who were the main founders here? The first name that should come in your mind is Aga Khan. Then Nawab Salimullah, who accompanied him. And finally on 30th December, they decided that they should form a separate organization that initially was known as All India Muslim League. Later on, it was the Muslim League only. Okay. And third one is Moshin ul Mulk. It has not been mentioned here in the book, but you must remember these names, right? Apart from that, another important leader who emerged after joining the Muslim League was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Okay, students? At first, he was believing in Hindu-Muslim unity, but certain circumstances took place in our country with the doings of the British government that created a rift between these two communities. Okay? As you can see, this is the image, again kind of blurred because these are very old images, and this is the working committee of the Muslim League. Okay? Here you can see at the center Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Now here, as you can see, Aga Khan and all the other important leaders of the Muslim League, initially All India Muslim League, when it was formed. Now coming to the question section here, let us see the question. When was Muslim League founded and who were its leaders? So the Muslim League, when was it founded? 30th December 1906. Who were its leaders? What are you going to answer in that? Aga Khan, Nawab Salimullah. Apart from that, Moshin ul Mulk, he was also the Nawab. Okay. So these were the topmost leaders, important leaders, founders of the All India Muslim League, that it was named initially and later on the Muslim League. Okay.